Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. This week's Question the Narrative video is about post offices, city halls, and science fiction novels. I know it sounds like a strange combination, but hear me out. I have been reading this book to my kids for our read aloud, and I did mention this in a video that I made a couple of weeks ago. It's in the Tripod series by John Christopher, a sci-fi series, and this particular book is called The White Mountains. And it's really made for some interesting conversations with my kids because actually the chapter that we read today was describing two parallel lines on on the road, and they were describing these boxes that were hooked together with wheels on them, and they were trying to figure out where they hitched the horses. And obviously they were talking about trains because if you have not read this series, it takes place in the future, but a very primitive future because it is a post reset primitive future where everything seems to have just gone back in time. There is no technology left, and they're not even sure what to make of the technology ruins that they come across. For example, they see a sign that says Lect City, and they think that it was the name of an old city. But what they don't realize is that there were actually just some letters missing, and there was something called electricity, something that they don't even know what it is anymore. So when they were describing this train that they found, which they called Schmond fares because they didn't really know what they were called, yeah, the characters were trying to figure out where they hooked up the horses to pull these things on the rails. And it really reminded me of how nowadays we think that we are so high tech. We think that we are really at the top rung of the quote evolutionary ladder, when in fact what we're finding is that we've lost a lot of knowledge. We've lost a lot of technology. And a lot of times when we do find that technology, we're not sure what to make of it. So one example of that is cathedrals. Now, if you want to some really in-depth videos about this, Martin from Flat Earth British, he has some really great videos on this subject, as well as some other YouTubers that I honestly can't think of their names off the top of my head. But yes, definitely check out Martin's channel about this. And also Autodidactic also has gotten into this as well. But what we see nowadays is we see what we would call cathedrals. But there is much speculation that these were so much more than cathedrals, that they were in fact not cathedrals at all, but that this may have been a giant machine. And that what we look at as spires may have been part of some sort of free energy. And if you look at the way that this book is written, it would make sense that if we are in a post-reset time, now I think that we would be pretty far beyond that reset, but we would still come across things that we don't quite know how they worked or what they were, like them thinking that you needed horses to pull trains. We look at these things and we just think that it's some sort of elaborate building. So then what we do is we then copy that. And people will build more cathedrals because they just look at it and they think, well, that was an old church and that's the style of the church, so let's just build more of those. But I really do believe that there was so much more to these old cathedrals, to this antiquitech, that we just don't know how to make sense of it. So we're trying to put our own knowledge with a lot of missing gaps into what we're seeing. And really, I've loved this book with my kids. Um, Another thing that we've noticed in this book is that they talk about how what a lot of the old city buildings look like. They didn't even know what cars were. They called them rusted carriages, and they were also trying to find where the horses were mounted onto the cars because they didn't understand that they were able to move on their own. But the buildings themselves, what they are living the buildings that they are living in these books, we would be amounted to, what we might call cabins. At least that's how I imagine it. Certainly not the buildings like we even see today, let alone the buildings that we look at from several hundred years ago. So again, I have to think to myself, when we look at old style architecture compared with what we see today, there really is a sort of cognitive dissonance for a lot of people because we see one thing, we're told that we are so much more advanced than people from hundreds of years ago. But when we see the things that they created, they our stuff doesn't even compare to it. So I wanted to look at some old post offices because I think that they really give a great example of what some of these older buildings really look like. And I think that we need to have some humility because the stuff that we do nowadays, not even close to this. Um, and actually, if you ask me, and I've said this before, not everybody likes when I say it, but I still believe that it's true. I believe that when we are looking at the way that we build things nowadays, when compared with the grandeur of what we see in these photos, to me, it's evidence of entropy, that we are actually degrading over time and not getting better. So this right here is one example of a post office. And this is in Boston. It's the Boston Post Office. And it's in the early 1900s. And the first thing that I have to ask, that I know a lot of other people have asked, is why would you need to build something this large for a post office, even for a larger city? Now, I've read in some articles that they needed the room because there were a lot of packages and that they had a lot of stamps that they were making. And so I could see needing a reasonably large amount of space for a post office. But when you get to some of these post offices, never mind the intricacy of what we see here, the space that is needed, the money that would be needed to put into something like this just to make it for a technology, or not technology, for a post office, it makes me rather suspect. And I think that these were not built to be post offices at all. So this one here is the St. Paul, Minnesota Old Post Office. We see the very same thing. We see so much of the intricate architecture that you just don't find nowadays. You see the arched windows that you see in a lot of the old world architecture, and it looks like a castle. It doesn't look like a post office. It looks like a castle. And when you look at it, this looks like a person down here in the bottom. And I think this says 1903. It's very hard to read that. I think that says 1903. But when you just see the size of that person, when compared to this, you just have to wonder, oh, and of course the street level windows. Let's not forget those. You just have to wonder, was this really built for a post office, or was this for something else entirely? And I would argue that it's for something else entirely. Here's the old post office, Minneapolis, Minnesota, from the 1900s. Where was this one from again? Okay, St. Paul, Minnesota. Okay, and so we do see up here what would look to be antiquitech. At the top here, you will see this formation at the tops of a lot of these older buildings, that it is theorized that they were used to draw the free energy down. I am no expert on this stuff for sure, but also in the very long series by E. Warrenon, I think it's called the Lost History of the Flat Earth, he does go into this very much. But again, you just have to wonder, why would they build something like this in what we are told were more primitive times? And even look at the building behind it. I'm not sure what that building was, but that in itself, from what we are told of what the people could do in those days, these buildings don't seem to add up or to match with what the narrative that we're given. So here's one from Duluth, Minnesota. Very beautiful. Again, very castle-like. Chicago Post Office, 1906. Again, you've got that antiquitech going on up here. And so a lot of times when we will see the things like this put on there, we're told, well, that's to prevent from lightning strikes. And I'm sure that on some buildings that they did put those there, but I think that a lot of times what we see there is not for lightning strikes. It is to draw free energy. And really, look, here we go again. Look at the size of these carriages next to this elaborate post office. And I'll leave links to this if you wanted to look at it, because there is some information about some of these post offices. But this is the new post office in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, built in 1901. Another castle-like phenomena. It even has little flags on it. That really, I mean, obviously you are going to see flags on post offices. But yeah, I think the flags really give it a kind of castle air as well. And we do see some of the street level windows down here, a lot of the same looks, the trademarks, the arched windows. We've got, again, that open space in here. And there's a little one right here. And you just look at it when compared. And always well, this looks like snow here. And yeah, the streets these streets actually aren't quite as dirty as you see on some of them. But there are sidewalks, so that's something. And yeah, look at the size of the people compared to that. So you might be wondering, what is my point? My point is that in this series, the tripod series, they are giving you a perfect example of what life will be like post reset. And yes, you are going to have a time where there are a lot of things around you that you don't quite understand and that you try to fit your own ideas into. But you're also going to find that things in the past, whether they are renovated, whether they were somehow unharmed in whatever happened, you are going to find that they were much better. And you could argue that even as time goes on, things were already degrading by this point, because as beautiful as this is, if you look at some of the very old architecture that you will especially see maybe over in Europe, that is even more extravagant than this. And we are marveling at this. So to me, it seems the further we go back in time, at least architecturally, it seems like they were definitely more advanced. Old post office in Port Huron, Michigan. And just look at the way, I love looking at the way that these people, can I zoom in on this? Oh, I can. Good. Not there. Let me try to move it down a little bit. Oops. Just look at the way that even people dressed in those days. It's just, whoops, I went too far. It's beautiful. It makes me so sad to see the way that not only the architecture has degraded, but society has degraded. Although, there are even questions if some of these photos are even staged. I don't think they all are, though. I think that some of them might have been staged. But I also do know that people did dress better in those days. They behaved better. They had modesty. They had respect. And I think that, unfortunately, yeah, that's another, to me, more evidence of entropy, even is just in the way that people dress and conduct themselves nowadays. Here we have the post office in, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Saginaw, Michigan. Another castle-like building for what would supposedly be a post office. Look at this, wow. Buffalo, New York post office. Was that only the post office for 6 years? Is that what that's telling us? So they built this. They built this beautiful building. Look at that. That's antiquitech if I've ever seen any. And they only used it for 6 years? That seems so wasteful. And, to me, post offices, even though I know that they're lucrative businesses and I know that they're important, I just, in my own mind, I cannot see the grandeur that they would be using to house these facilities. So again, yeah, we do see a lot of the street level windows here, the arched windows. Let's just go down a little bit. City Hall Station, Post Office, New York, New York. Wow. See, now here, that looks like cobblestone maybe in the street. You can see they already have a tram at this point. So it doesn't say years for this one though. So this was, again, in City Hall Station, Post Office, New York, New York. And again, I don't know, it's just mind-blowing to me. And also, you have to point out again, I say this all the time, we've got, yeah, we have a tram, but we also have horse and buggies. And it just, so many of the things don't seem to add up on how they built these things. And if you look, okay, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, they had a lot of skilled workers and there were a lot of masons who were able to do to make those buildings. I get it. But if you look in the background, it's not just the post office. It's not just one or two buildings that are like this. It looks like these cities were built out with these glorious buildings that we just don't see today. And you will actually see, I'm going to be showing you some city halls in a little bit, and it's supposed to be a post of the nicest city halls, but some of them are modern, and you will just see the difference. The modern city halls are eyesores when compared to the older ones. So we have post office here in New York City. This one looks very Greco-Roman in its style. Old U.S. Post Office, Troy, New York. A lot of them really do look very similar. And they're all similar in that they don't look like post offices to me. Well, they might look like post offices because that's what we see as post offices, but I don't think that's what they were built for. I think that these buildings were taken over and were given that purpose. They were told, okay, we're going to use this as a post office. And so that's exactly what they did. So this one is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Another beautiful building for a post office. And we'll just scroll through a little bit more. I don't think I need much more commentary on this. But I will say, okay, so this is Chestnut Street and Post Office, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So here we have the post office, but it's not just the post office that's gorgeous. It looks like everything is built that way. Baltimore, Maryland. Boston, Massachusetts. Wow, look at that. That definitely looks very, could be muddy there. It could also be more of the cobblestone or some sort of stone street, but it looks muddy to me. Wow. Cleveland, Ohio, back to the beautifully dressed individuals. Makes me wish for that I would have been born at a different time. This one is Toledo, Ohio. Louisville, Kentucky. Wow, another one. Just absolutely gorgeous. Very muddy streets. I don't know what this is down here. Looks like some sort of wall. I don't know, retaining wall maybe there? That's interesting too. Augusta, Georgia. Custom House and Post Office, Memphis, Tennessee. Montgomery, Alabama. So yeah, so this really does give you some ideas of why we really need to start questioning what time period we are living in now. We know that we're living in the now, but we need to start realizing that we're not as great as we think we are. And there were people here before us who knew much more than us. Now we're going to get to the city halls, and I promise you I'm not going to spend as much time on the city halls, just because even though it's supposed to be 10 of the most beautiful city halls, you will very quickly see that some of them are horrifying, even though they're listed as beautiful. And yeah, they do end up being the modern ones. So, well, this is the Philadelphia City Hall. I mean, if you thought the post offices were beautiful and elaborate and castle-like, look at the city halls, especially Philadelphia City Hall. I zoom in on this a little bit. I only live about an hour and a half from Philadelphia. I really need to take a drive there. The one thing that keeps me from going is just that. Yeah, here's one of those eyesores. But the one thing that keeps me from going there is just how people drive in Philadelphia. It's not pleasant. So that I really don't know if I would even like to drive around there. But here's Austin City Hall, and so you can just see. So we go from here to here. And if you can't see the difference between those two and how we have surely degraded over time, then I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Let's just go down. Buffalo City Hall. Let's see. I can't zoom in too much here. I want to see what that is up there. huge city hall. Now, the city hall where I live is just a municipal building. It's pretty small, but even, yeah, another eyesore, San Jose City Hall. No comparison when you look at the old world ones. Another one. Some of these, I don't even know how they made this list. I really don't. This one, it looks like they were trying to copy the style of the old world city halls without quite making it. It's completed in 1928, but I think that even if you notice the difference, unless they gave it a new facade, and if they did, they didn't do a very good job of it. But yeah, it's you can tell that it has that structure, but it's not the same. Another one that you just look at it and you think, what happened? Here we go. Here's Milwaukee City Hall. We have the antiquitech. We have these arched windows here. A lot of them have the clocks, the clock towers on them. And just the difference between the two. To me, this looks like chaos to me. Even though everything is symmetrical and everything, to me it looks like chaos, and this looks more orderly to me. Here we have the New York City one. Absolutely stunning. I wonder if this is part of it or if that's just a building behind it. San Francisco. Looks like a Capitol building. That's just a city hall. Okay, so let's just read this one. After San Francisco's first city hall, one of the largest buildings in the West in the 19th century, was destroyed in the 1906 earthquake and subsequent fire, the city decided to build a new landmark. In 1912, a competition was held to find a design for a new city hall. You will see that narrative a lot. There's always some sort of competition to build things. They did that with the Crystal Palaces. And then a novice gardener, well, not a novice gardener, but a novice architect, we should say, was chosen to build the Crystal Palaces. Throughout what we're told is history, you will always see, for some reason, contests to build certain buildings. That's at least what we're told. So this building opened in 1915, and this was the one that we started with, the Philadelphia City Hall one. But anyway, I hope I brought my point across to you that if you haven't read the tripods, even though it was written for, like, I would say like middle school age, as an adult, I am really enjoying this book, especially as an awake adult who sees the things that are happening around us. And I can recognize so many truths in this science fiction novel. Obviously, we don't have giant tripods like that walking around yet. I'm not even throwing anything off the table anymore. But so many truths in there. So many, to me, glimpses of the reality that we are living now that just doesn't only have to do with a science fiction book. Because if you ask me, it sure seems like we're living in a science fiction world now. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.